Your father did not lose his future, Hannah. Your mother signed it away. Blake Mercer spoke quietly enough that only she could hear him, while 50 mourners stood beneath black umbrellas pretending the funeral was about grief instead of guilt. For 18 years, Hannah Cole had imagined what she would say if she ever stood this close to the man who inherited her father's company, married her mother, paid for her education, and turned Bellwether, Pennsylvania, into a city that seemed to carry his name on every brick. She had imagined accusations, questions, and cold silence. She had not imagined Blake arriving at Ethan Cole's funeral with a $10,000 check and the composed smile of a man who still believed everyone present belonged to him. Rain had fallen since dawn, and the temperature had dropped to 42 degrees. Water gathered along the green burial tent and spilled onto the grass. Hannah stood beside her mother with both hands locked around her umbrella. Laura Mercer, once Laura Cole, kept one hand around Hannah's elbow as though she expected her daughter to run or say something that could never be taken back. Across the grave, Blake looked untouched by the weather. His charcoal coat fit perfectly. His silver hair was combed back. His expression was arranged for the newspaper photographer near the cemetery gate. The mayor had come. The police chief had come. 2 hospital board members had come. Men who had ignored Ethan's letters for years now lowered their heads as though they had shared his burden. Hannah remembered being 9 years old when Ethan accepted a plea agreement connected to financial fraud and the warehouse fire that destroyed his reputation. Children at school said he had burned the building for insurance money. Her mother sold furniture, stopped answering the telephone, and avoided every question. Then Blake appeared with groceries, legal advice, mortgage payments, and the patient kindness of a man who never needed to raise his voice. He paid the $86,000 balance on their home. He attended parent-teacher conferences. He taught Hannah to drive in an empty church parking lot. At her college graduation, he stood beside Laura and called Hannah his daughter. Now Ethan was dead, and Blake still occupied the place where her father should have been. When the minister finished, mourners approached one by one. Blake waited until the mayor had shaken Hannah's hand, then removed an envelope from his coat and held it where everyone could see. Ethan made many mistakes, he said, his voice carrying beyond the tent. But no child should keep paying for a parent's choices. Laura's fingers tightened around Hannah's arm. Blake placed the check on the closed casket. $10,000. For whatever Hannah needs next. At least this time, Ethan can still help his daughter. No one spoke. That silence hurt more than the insult. Everyone had heard him, and everyone had chosen comfort over truth. Hannah stared at the check until the numbers blurred. She felt the rain on her wrist and the old command she had lived under since childhood. Do not embarrass the family. Do not make things worse. Do not ask what happened. She released the umbrella. It fell into the wet grass. Then she stepped forward, lifted the check, tore it down the center, and let the pieces fall beside Blake's polished shoes. Laura whispered her name as a plea. Blake did not move. Be careful, he said. Grief can make people confuse pain with evidence. A prepaid phone vibrated inside Hannah's coat. Ethan's former attorney had mailed it after his death with instructions to keep it charged through the funeral. A scheduled voicemail notification now filled the screen. Hannah pressed the speaker button. Ethan's voice emerged, weak but unmistakable. Hannah, if Blake Mercer comes to my funeral, it means he is still afraid. Every person beneath the tent heard him. Blake's smile disappeared for less than a second. Do not ask who started the fire, Ethan continued. Ask who built a future from the ashes. When Blake tells you I failed you, remember this. He did not take my company first. He took my name. The message ended. Hannah looked directly at Blake. My father said you stole his life. I am going to find out who helped you. Blake stepped closer and embraced her before she could move away. To the mourners, it looked like a grieving stepfather comforting his daughter. His voice reached only her. Start with your mother. He released her and walked toward his black Lincoln Navigator. Laura remained beneath the tent, pale and motionless. What did he mean? Hannah asked. Laura bent to retrieve the umbrella. Not here. Then where? Hannah, please. That word again. Please remain quiet. Please protect the family. Hannah left the cemetery alone. 2 hours later, after a manager at First Bellwether Bank verified the authorization Ethan had filed naming her as an approved co-renter, Hannah opened his safe deposit box. It contained a photograph of Ethan and Blake outside an abandoned steel mill in 2007, standing beside a hand-painted sign that read Mercer and Coal Redevelopment. Beneath it lay plans for a $28 million riverfront project. Every page named them as equal partners. At the bottom was an agreement transferring Ethan's 50% interest to Blake for $1. Ethan's signature appeared on the final page. The date was October 18, 2008, 3 days after he entered county custody. Hannah read the witness line twice. Laura Cole had certified the signature. On the back, Ethan had written one sentence. The truth is not hidden from the family. The family is what hides it. By the time Hannah reached her mother's house, the rain had stopped, but the sky over Bellwether still looked like unfinished concrete. Blake's Lincoln Navigator was gone. Hannah entered with the transfer agreement folded inside her coat and placed it on the kitchen table without saying hello. Laura looked at the witness line and slowly lowered herself into a chair. You signed it, Hannah said. You gave Blake half of everything for $1. Laura folded her hands. That paper is not the whole story. Then tell me the part that makes it better. Framed photographs covered the hallway wall. Hannah at 12 beside Blake at a Pittsburgh Pirates game. Hannah at 17 holding a scholarship certificate. Hannah in her college gown between her mother and the man who had replaced Ethan. Your father was already in county custody, Laura said. The company accounts were frozen. Creditors were calling every hour. Blake said the project would collapse unless Ethan's shares were transferred. Did Dad agree? Laura looked toward the sink. He knew something had to be done. That is not an answer. You came here expecting one sentence that would separate the guilty from the innocent. Life did not give us that. Hannah felt anger rise, but something colder moved beneath it. Blake told me to start with you. Fear appeared openly on Laura's face. You should not trust anything he says. I do not. That is why I am asking you. Laura admitted that Ethan knew Blake was moving money between accounts, changing construction estimates, and promising investors returns the project could not support. Ethan stayed because he believed he could repair the company before anyone was harmed. Your father always believed one honest conversation could repair a dishonest man, Laura said. Hannah left before her mother could turn that sentence into an excuse. She drove 3 miles east to the Bellwether Public Library and searched the local newspaper archives. In photographs from 2006 and 2007, Ethan and Blake stood together before abandoned steel buildings, promising jobs, housing, and a new riverfront. Ethan spoke about keeping working families in Bellwether. Blake spoke about growth. 6 months before the warehouse fire, Ethan's name began disappearing. Blake became the sole spokesman. Worker housing became luxury apartments and medical offices. An August 2008 headline called Blake the visionary behind Bellwether's rebirth. Ethan appeared near the bottom as an early consultant. Hannah printed the article and studied the photograph. Blake stood in front, shaking hands with the mayor. Ethan watched from behind him. At the edge stood an older man wearing a union pin. The caption identified him as Samuel Reed of Steelworkers Local 814. Hannah found his address in an old directory. Samuel lived in a small brick house near the railroad tracks, less than 2 miles from the riverfront development. He answered the door wearing a faded Penn State sweatshirt and studied Hannah before inviting her inside. His living room smelled of coffee and old paper. Union newsletters covered one end table. You have Ethan's eyes, he said. People keep telling me that. They mean you look like you are waiting for someone to lie. Hannah placed the article on the table. What happened before the fire? Samuel explained that Ethan discovered Blake planned to remove the union labor requirement. Hundreds of local workers had supported the project because Ethan promised steady jobs. Blake wanted outside contractors who would work for less. Did Ethan try to stop him? Hannah asked. Eventually. What does that mean? It means your father knew for months that Blake was changing the deal. He stayed quiet because he thought public disagreement would scare away investors. By the time he decided to speak, Blake controlled the money, the permits, and the mayor's office. The image Hannah had begun rebuilding of Ethan cracked. So he allowed it. He delayed facing it, Samuel said. That delay cost him everything. He opened a metal filing cabinet and removed a bundle of letters tied with string. The envelopes carried prison stamps and Ethan's handwriting. He sent these over 12 years. He told me to keep them until someone came looking for the truth instead of a hero. The early letters described contracts, meetings, and missing records. The later ones were more personal. Ethan admitted that the project had become proof that he mattered. He wanted to save Bellwether, but he also wanted his name on the skyline. Ambition made Blake dangerous and made Ethan blind. Hannah read until the mantel clock struck 9. In the final envelope, Ethan had written her name, but no address. Samuel said Ethan could never decide whether sending it would protect her or burden her. The letter was only 2 pages. Ethan warned Hannah not to turn him into an innocent man with no responsibility for his fall. He had concealed Blake's misconduct, misled Laura about the company's finances, and believed he could control the consequences. Near the end, one sentence had been underlined twice. Blake was not the first person to betray me. Below it, Ethan had written 6 words that changed every memory Hannah had left. I asked your mother for help. Laura did not deny betraying Ethan. She only asked Hannah how much of the truth she was prepared to lose. It was nearly 10 o'clock when Hannah returned to the house, carrying the prison letters. Laura remained at the kitchen table with the $1 transfer agreement beneath her hands. Hannah placed Ethan's final letter in front of her. He asked you for help. Laura read the underlined sentence and closed her eyes. Yes. What did he ask you to do? Take the accounting records to state investigators in Harrisburg. Did you? Laura's silence answered first. Hannah sat across from her. Ethan had given Laura copies of canceled checks, altered bids, and correspondence showing that Blake planned to remove him from the company. 2 days before the warehouse fire, the box disappeared. Where did you take it? Hannah asked. Laura walked toward the coffee maker, then stopped when she saw the empty pot. Blake came here while Ethan was meeting with Samuel. He said the state would freeze every account connected to the project. Investors would sue. Our house could be seized because Ethan had used it as collateral. And you believed him. I was 34 years old. I had $600 in checking, a 9-year-old daughter, and a husband who kept promising that one more meeting would fix everything. Laura turned toward her. Blake did not shout or threaten me. He explained one consequence after another until fear sounded like common sense. Hannah understood then that Blake had not merely stolen Ethan's company. He had taught Laura to participate while believing she was saving her family. You gave him the box. Part of it. What did you keep? Enough to make sure he could not abandon us. Laura admitted that Blake's mortgage payments and legal support had not begun as charity. They were the price of her silence. At first, she added. The words made Hannah look up. Laura refused to call every kindness false. Blake had brought groceries when she was too ashamed to leave the house. He sat outside Hannah's room after the verdict. When Hannah's school bus broke down after a debate tournament near Altoona, Blake drove 3 hours through a snowstorm with blankets, hot chocolate, and a rented passenger van. Hannah had kept that memory as proof that he loved her. Now it felt tied to a debt she had never agreed to owe. When did you start loving him? Hannah asked. Laura looked at her wedding ring. I do not know when gratitude became dependence or when dependence became something I could call love. Did Dad know? He suspected before the trial. Hannah pushed back from the table. You were already choosing Blake. I was choosing stability. You keep changing the name of it. Laura removed a framed photograph from the hallway. It showed Hannah at her high school graduation, smiling between Laura and Blake. Ethan promised to telephone that morning, Laura said. You waited beside the kitchen phone until we had to leave. Blake found you there, told you your father would be proud, and stayed beside you all day. Dad was in prison. You were still a child who needed someone to show up. Laura placed the photograph on the table. Blake understood absence. He knew how to fill it. Hannah saw the architecture of her second family. Every missed call from Ethan created space. Every bill Blake paid strengthened a wall. Every birthday and holiday turned substitution into history. Did Blake interfere with Dad's calls or letters? She asked. I do not know. You never asked. There were questions I believed I could not afford to ask. Laura opened a drawer and removed a small key taped beneath a stack of takeout menus. She explained that Ethan's documents could expose Blake, but they also showed Ethan had signed incomplete financial statements and approved loans based on projections he no longer believed. After the warehouse fire, the prosecutor offered an agreement. If Ethan pleaded guilty to financial fraud and falsifying records tied to the warehouse claim, Laura would not be charged with withholding evidence or certifying a false transfer. The night before his plea, he called me, Laura said. I told him that if he fought, you could lose both parents. I said I could not survive prison, and neither could you. Hannah could barely hear her own voice. You asked him to plead guilty. Yes. Blake had designed the trap, but Laura had asked Ethan to enter it. Ethan agreed because the people he loved made his sacrifice sound necessary. Laura placed the key beside the letter. Jefferson Road Storage. Unit 214. I kept what Blake believed I destroyed. Why tell me now? Because Ethan is gone, Blake is frightened, and you are beginning to remember Blake as a monster. Laura looked toward the photographs. The truth is worse. Monsters are easy to leave. Blake made himself necessary. Hannah closed her hand around the key. And my father? Laura looked into the dark window. Ethan made himself expendable. The recording in storage unit 214 sounded like a confession, and for 2 days Hannah believed the truth had finally chosen her side. Jefferson Road Storage sat behind a closed furniture warehouse on the eastern edge of Bellwether. Laura's key card allowed 24-hour access. The unit measured 10 feet by 15 feet and held the remains of a life reduced to labeled boxes. Tax records, project bids, bank notices, school papers, and Ethan's winter coats beneath clear plastic. Hannah understood that Laura had not preserved a clean archive. She had hidden a family after deciding which memories were safe enough to keep. Near the back wall, Hannah found a metal cash box containing altered construction estimates, canceled checks, and letters between Blake and city officials. The papers showed favors and pressure, but none directly proved that Blake arranged Ethan's removal. Then she found a cassette recorder wrapped in a kitchen towel. A strip of masking tape read Blake, October 2008. Static filled the unit, followed by Laura's younger voice asking whether Ethan would accept the agreement. Blake answered calmly, Ethan will take the plea. He always chooses to save everyone else before he saves himself. Laura asked what would happen if he refused. He will not refuse after you explain what his pride will cost his daughter. The exchange did not prove who caused the fire, but it revealed strategy and control. More important, it gave Bellwether something people could hear without reading hundreds of pages. Hannah contacted Rebecca Sloan, an investigative reporter who covered Western Pennsylvania. Rebecca met her at a diner 6 miles outside town and collected the original cassette, transfer agreement, and letters. Blake will answer you before he answers the evidence, she warned. Over the next 2 days, Rebecca verified the ownership records, interviewed former employees, and asked an audio consultant whether the voices were consistent with Laura and Blake. The consultant could identify the speakers, but could not certify that the cassette was complete. Rebecca published the documents and described the recording as a disputed contemporaneous excerpt. A local radio station played part of it after Hannah authorized the release. By noon, the mayor announced a review of city contracts connected to Mercer Development. Hospital board members canceled an appearance with Blake. Hannah watched the coverage from Samuel Reed's living room as commentators spoke of a possible conspiracy against Ethan Cole. Samuel smiled for the first time. Your father waited 18 years for this morning. Hannah wanted relief. Instead, she felt the dangerous warmth of being believed. It lasted until Blake held a press conference that afternoon. He did not deny that the voice was his. He described Hannah as grieving and vulnerable to people seeking access to the Mercer fortune. Then his attorney released a longer excerpt from Blake's own recording of the same meeting. After the sentence about Ethan saving others, Blake could be heard saying, Laura told me he had already decided to protect her. The meaning shifted. Blake no longer sounded like a man directing a sacrifice. He sounded like a man discussing a decision Ethan had already made. A television station hired a forensic specialist to examine Laura's cassette. The copy contained several discontinuities. Background noise changed between sentences. Someone had assembled it from separate parts of the meeting. By nightfall, the story was no longer about Blake's influence. It was about Hannah presenting altered evidence. Old family emails, public social media posts, and statements from former classmates were circulated to portray her as bitter and unreliable. None proved dishonesty, but pain was treated as though it were evidence against her. Rebecca called before midnight. I still believe there is a larger story, but I cannot defend an edited recording. Hannah drove to Laura's house. Blake was not there. Laura sat in the dark living room while the press conference replayed silently on television. Hannah placed the recorder on the coffee table. You changed it. Laura nodded. Years ago. You let me give it to a reporter. I did not know you would release it so quickly. You gave me a key and said you kept what Blake thought you destroyed. I kept protection. Laura explained that after Ethan entered prison, Blake began deciding how much money they received, which lawyers spoke for them, and which letters from Ethan received answers. She needed something dangerous enough to keep him cautious. You manufactured a confession. I manufactured insurance. You made me look like a liar. Laura walked to the bookshelf and removed a cardboard case hidden behind cookbooks. Inside was another cassette. The voices on the edited copy were real. Every sentence was spoken during the same meeting. I cut it because the full recording implicated more than Blake. Hannah pressed play. Laura and Blake spoke first. Then Charles Benton, an executive at First Bellwether Bank, warned that a public trial could expose loans connected to municipal pension funds. A union attorney discussed the jobs that would disappear if the project failed. Another man said Ethan could not be allowed to testify openly about the redevelopment accounts. Finally, an older, measured voice said the court would accept the agreement if every signature was in place before morning. Hannah recognized Judge Walter Grayson from archived news footage, but recognition was not proof. Rebecca would have to verify him. Still, the meaning was unmistakable. Blake had not controlled Ethan's fate alone. Before the hearing began, the bank, the lawyers, and the court were already in the room. By sunrise, Hannah understood that exposing Judge Walter Grayson would not free Bellwether from Blake Mercer. It would reveal how many people had helped build the cage. She spent the night at Laura's kitchen table listening to the complete recording. No one spoke about justice. They discussed bond ratings, construction schedules, pension funds, and how quickly the public would accept one guilty man if the alternative was a guilty city. Hannah copied the recording onto encrypted drives. She gave one to Samuel Reed, one to Rebecca Sloan, and delivered a third through an attorney to state investigators. Rebecca agreed not to publish until the voices and documents could be independently verified. By the following afternoon, 2 former city officials had identified Grayson, Charles Benton, and the union attorney. Public records showed that Grayson joined the Mercer Foundation board 14 months after Ethan's sentencing. Benton approved an emergency loan that saved Mercer Development. The union attorney later received a consulting contract worth $400,000. Each favor had been separated by enough time to appear innocent. Together, they formed a map. Rebecca began contacting the hospital, the school district, the bank, and city officials for comment. Word spread before publication. The hospital president called Hannah and reminded her that Blake had promised $5 million for a cardiac care expansion. The superintendent explained that the Mercer Foundation funded breakfast programs for nearly 800 students. A contractor approached Hannah outside Samuel's house and said 42 employees depended on the riverfront project. "I am not saying your father deserved what happened," he said. "I am saying my people have mortgages." At a coffee shop near the courthouse, a woman Hannah remembered from church asked whether clearing Ethan's name was worth jeopardizing the only planned cardiology clinic within 30 miles. The same residents who once called Ethan corrupt now described Blake as complicated, necessary, and too important to fail. Samuel listened to every warning. "They do not think Blake is innocent," he said. "They think guilt is affordable only when poor people carry it." The Founders Gala was scheduled for the next evening at the Mercer Grand Hotel. Blake planned to announce the hospital donation before 600 guests, including the mayor, state lawmakers, business owners, and reporters. Rebecca wanted to publish shortly before the event, when no official could quietly bury the story. Laura wanted to wait for investigators. Samuel wanted every record released immediately. Hannah could no longer tell which choice served the truth and which merely satisfied anger. At 4 o'clock, a messenger delivered an invitation to Blake's office on the 12th floor of Mercer Tower. Beneath the address, Blake had written one sentence: "You deserve to hear the offer your father rejected." Hannah arrived at sunset. Blake stood beside a wall of windows overlooking the riverfront, where cranes rose above unfinished apartments. From that height, Bellwether looked renewed. Old mills had become offices. Empty lots had become parking garages. The city displayed Blake's name as proof that decline could be reversed. "You brought the recording," he said. "You already know what is on it. I know what my mother kept. I do not know what you destroyed." Hannah remained near the door. Grayson helped arrange the plea before the hearing. He protected a redevelopment plan tied to thousands of jobs and millions of dollars in public obligations. He protected you. Blake faced her. By then, those were the same thing. He opened a folder. Inside was a prepared statement acknowledging Ethan as an equal founder and admitting that the ownership transfer had been improper. A second document offered Laura and Hannah $8 million. A third created a $30 million community trust in Ethan's name. You sign a confidentiality agreement, Blake said. Tomorrow I admit the business truth. Ethan receives public credit. Your family receives restitution. The hospital keeps its donation. The housing project continues. No school loses funding. And Grayson retires quietly. Benton leaves the bank board. No investigation. No collapse. Hannah looked through the windows. You are asking me to trade the truth for a better version of your lie. I am asking you to recognize that truth has a price, and you will not be the only person paying it. Blake said Ethan had received a similar offer before the fire. He could have admitted financial misconduct, retained part of his ownership, and protected the project. Ethan refused because he wanted everyone involved exposed. He chose moral purity after years of compromise, Blake said. By then, purity was the most expensive thing he could demand. The accusation hurt because Ethan's letters supported part of it. Blake opened a drawer and removed a sealed envelope. Ethan had sent it through an attorney 3 years after entering prison, instructing Blake to deliver it if Hannah ever confronted him over the company. Blake had kept it because he believed it proved Ethan expected his daughter to repeat his mistake. Inside, Ethan warned Hannah that Blake would offer money, recognition, and a form of justice designed to preserve the structure that destroyed him. He asked one question: how many innocent people should suffer so that guilty people cannot remain comfortable? His final line was harder. I rejected the deal because I wanted the truth to be clean, but the truth was never clean, and neither was I. Blake held out a pen. You can give your father his name back tomorrow. Hannah looked at the confession, the settlement, and the city below. Blake was offering to restore only the part of Ethan's future that he still controlled. No, she said. Tomorrow, you do not decide which truth survives. By the time Blake stepped onto the ballroom stage, Hannah had already placed the evidence beyond his reach. The Mercer Grand glittered above the riverfront, with 600 guests seated beneath crystal lights while a large screen displayed clinics, apartment towers, and scholarship recipients. Laura sat near the front. Samuel Reed stood beside Rebecca Sloan along the rear wall. Hannah waited near the center aisle with Ethan's letter folded inside her coat. At 7:30, Blake announced that the Mercer Foundation would donate $5 million to expand cardiac care in Bellwether. The room rose in applause. Hannah understood why so many people had chosen him. Blake never asked the city to believe he was innocent. He asked it to calculate the cost of losing him. When the applause faded, he looked toward Hannah. Tonight, I also intend to correct an old injustice. He began describing Ethan as an important early partner whose contribution had not received proper recognition. It was the confession he had offered Hannah, reduced to language that admitted unfairness without naming fraud, pressure, or the officials who protected him. Before he could finish, phones began vibrating across the ballroom. Rebecca's investigation had been published simultaneously by 3 newspapers, while copies of the complete recording, financial documents, letters, and ownership agreements had been filed with state and federal agencies. Reporters near the rear wall began reading the alerts. One called out a question about Judge Grayson. Another asked Blake whether Charles Benton had protected Mercer Development's loans. The applause dissolved into overlapping voices. Blake remained at the podium. These materials are incomplete and irresponsible, he said. Their release could jeopardize jobs, medical services, and families across this city. Then he looked directly at Hannah. You could have restored your father's name without doing this. Every camera turned toward her. Hannah stepped into the aisle. You offered to return the part of his life that made you look generous. My father concealed misconduct. My mother signed a false transfer. Judge Grayson shaped a plea before the hearing. The bank protected its loans, and the city protected its projects. You called it stability because that sounded better than choosing one man to carry the blame. Grayson moved toward a side exit, but reporters followed him. Blake gripped the podium. People may lose jobs because of what you released. Then the people who created the risk should answer for it, Hannah said. Not the man you erased. Blake looked across the ballroom at the workers and families who depended on his money. Publishing records only makes you powerful enough to choose the damage. Hannah felt Ethan's letter against her chest. I am not choosing who deserves protection. That is what you did for 18 years. The room did not suddenly reject Blake. Some guests left. Some remained near him. Others gathered around Rebecca and Samuel. Bellwether divided according to what each person feared losing, and that division was more honest than the applause had been. During the next 3 weeks, investigators issued subpoenas for bank records, foundation accounts, and communications tied to Ethan's plea. Grayson resigned from the Mercer Foundation Board. Benton stepped away from the bank. Blake continued to insist that every decision had protected Bellwether from collapse. Many residents believed him. Several public boards voted to remove his name from programs and buildings. The hospital placed the donation under legal review. Construction slowed, but the city appointed independent oversight and began seeking replacement financing. Months later, a grand jury returned charges involving the forged ownership transfer, concealed financial records, and obstruction of the investigation. Laura gave a formal statement admitting that she had certified the false transfer and altered the first cassette. Hannah sat beside her during the interview, but did not hold her hand. Forgiveness was not the same as protection. Laura had loved Ethan, feared Blake, and asked one man to surrender his future so she could preserve Hannah's. No single word could make that harmless. The district attorney also reopened the review of Ethan's case. After the Commonwealth acknowledged undisclosed conflicts and evidence withheld from the defense, the court granted a petition from Ethan's estate to vacate the fraud counts tied to the manipulated records. The order did not declare him perfect or return 18 years. It corrected a judgment built on a compromised plea. Newspapers called it a posthumous victory. Hannah did not. Victory would have been Ethan walking free, making one more telephone call, attending one graduation, or sharing one ordinary Sunday dinner. A court could repair a record. It could not restore time. Over the following year, new financing allowed the Riverfront Community Center to open. The city removed the Mercer name. Samuel suggested naming it for Ethan. Laura agreed. Hannah refused. He wanted the work to belong to the people who lived here. The sign eventually read Bellwether Community Center. A plaque inside listed the original planners, contractors, union representatives, and neighborhood groups, including Ethan Cole. His name was no larger than anyone else's, but it was there. Blake had spent years proving that power meant making one name impossible to ignore. Ethan's final lesson was that justice did not require another monument. Before a public oversight hearing the following spring, Hannah sat on the center's front steps, less than half a mile from the old warehouse site. She opened Ethan's sketchbook to the final page. Beneath a drawing of the riverfront, he had written that a person could steal an opportunity, a reputation, and years of someone's life, but could not own the ending unless the survivors surrendered it. Hannah closed the book as the doors opened behind her. She did not enter to defend a flawless father or condemn a simple villain. She entered to tell the complete story, including the parts that hurt the people she loved. Ethan's future was no longer something Blake could sell back to her. It had become a truth no one man in Bellwether would ever again be powerful enough to own.